Hello, everybody. I am Jayme CheeseSlice, the engineer and producer of Uncontrolled Opposition. Welcome to the show today. We're going to be talking about the new technocratic world order. That's why I got the NWO behind me right there today. We've got a bunch of billionaires going over to China, and we're going to talk about that. And then we've also got this technocratic takeover of Latin America that's going on. They probably want to bring to the entire world. So that's what's on our agenda for today. And we've got our guest, Fiorella Isabel and Vanessa Beely. But first, let me bring on our hosts, Gloria, Guillo, and Jayme Kuzmarov. How are you guys doing today?
Hey.
All right. We are going to go ahead and bring on our guests. I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to hand it over to Gloria. So, before I do that, though, this is your first time watching us here on Uncontrolled Opposition on YouTube. This is first and foremost a radio program, and that's why I'm the engineer on here, just to let you guys know about that and introducing that. We're going to record about an hour, 55 minutes. It'll be edited down for the radio, but you're going to get all the unedited, uncut stuff right here on the live stream. And with that, Gloria, take it away.
Hey everyone, welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition, where together we battle mind wars with truth strikes. I'm Gloria Guillo, an investigative journalist, and I'm here with my co-host, Professor Jayme Kuzmarov, managing editor of Covert Action magazine. Our producer and engineer is Jayme CheeseSlice. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guests, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. This content is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as professional or legal advice. Listeners are encouraged to form their own opinions. We are very pleased to welcome back to our show Fiorella Isabel and Vanessa Beely. They are world-class investigative journalists and activists focused on geopolitics. Today, they will help us dissect a coordinated global assault on sovereignty driven by the predatory elites who are pursuing a new technocratic world order. Let's discuss how the exaggerated media narratives regarding Mexico's cartel violence are used to justify U.S. intervention. Let's discuss why China and Russia's response to the U.S. blockade on Cuba has been mostly lip service and humanitarian aid. China's been supplying Cuba with renewable energy systems and components like solar and tons of rice, and Russia's been providing only short-term energy relief with oil shipments that last under 2 weeks, while Russia has pledged continued aid and frames it as an ongoing solidarity against the U.S. blockade. Deliveries remain ad hoc, humanitarian or political gestures rather than a steady contractual pipeline. The U.S. has excluded Cuba from broader Russian oil waivers and maintains pressure, making reliable, large-scale deliveries difficult and expensive. Let's discuss why U.S.-China rivalry has intensified over resources in Peru, such as China's Chansi megaport. Let's discuss why U.S. kidnapped Let's discuss why the U.S. kidnapped Venezuelan President Maduro and First Lady Flores and captured Venezuela oil markets, and why the U.S. removed President Assad in Syria before ramping up its attacks on Iran. Why Russia and China prioritize their U.S. and Israeli ties over militarily defending Cuba, Venezuela, Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. Is Gaza just a testing ground for US and Israeli weapons and a grim template for biometric control, population management, and land erasure? Are we entering a neo-feudal future where populations become data points under AI-driven technocratic domination? Will multipolar hopes like BRICS falter amid self-interested capital pursuits? Let's start by discussing yesterday's predator class school trip to China with Trump in tow. As pundits say, there hasn't been such a gathering since the Lolita flights on Epstein's plane to Little St. James. Thank you. Ladies, welcome back to our show. Before diving into geopolitics, please start by reminding our audience about your vast personal experiences in the Mideast, Latin America, and Eastern Europe. Fiorella, how about you? Start with you.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I want to go reminding everybody. You can find me on Twitter, but I've currently in Latin America, lived in Russia, and also since the beginning of the war till now, things have shifted. And obviously from the United States, also Peruvian, and have also been traveling throughout West Asia, so have a lot of just different perspectives, critical perspectives on a lot of things.
And Vanessa, how about you? Where are you coming from?
The Middle East. I mean, basically on and off, I've been based here from Gaza, Egypt, Iraq, Syria. I lived and worked there for 10 years, lived there fully for 5 years until the fall. I was there until the last day. Now based in Beirut, Lebanon. I've also visited Donbass. I've visited Iran twice. And so I guess that's my area of understanding, let's say. And again, people can find my work at my Substack.
Yeah, just to restate, I mean, we're not talking about armchair journalists here. We're talking about boots on the ground in every country we're going to discuss. So let's take it away. Do you guys want to start with this plane ride? I mean, the jokes about this plane ride are just fantastic.
Yeah, Fee, do you want to start on this?
Okay. So I have some opinions, and I'll try to make it brief. The way this is being discussed is very frustrating for me, because it comes across like we're just mocking the United States, which, like I said, I tweeted about this, and I said it's very easy and it's fun to make fun of Trump and this administration, because yes, they're idiots, they're evil, they're pedophiles, whatever you want to say about this administration, just on that cosmetic way. Yes, that is what they are. However, what is exactly going on here when you have literally the world's richest billionaires combined, this is like an entourage of trillions of dollars, and you have these people like never before going to Beijing and essentially having a meeting with China. And we're talking about people on Wall Street, people from the defense industry, the most important people. You have Elon Musk from AI, surveillance, big tech, Silicon Valley. It is this whole entourage, and they're meeting in Beijing they're going with Trump. They're all excited, and all everybody's talking about is how she apparently does not like Trump or frowned at him. And it's like, oh, well, they're just begging. They're going to go beg China for if not for money, for renewed contracts, for, for all of this stuff that they had before, because, Donald Trump ruined it with more tariffs and sanctions and attacking China in this way. But what they're really missing here is that China operates as a pragmatic player, as a player that is looking out for its economic interests. It is selling to everybody, and everybody is buying from China. China, even as we've discussed before, Vanessa and I have discussed this, they buy from Israel. They have a trade relationship with Israel even right now. So China isn't this player that's just like ideologically on a high horse, not going to have any discussion involving economics with the United States. Whether or not she likes Trump or not is really irrelevant when they're not operating from an ideological stance. They're operating from a stance that is specifically trying to grow its economy. And China is affected by what happened during this war with Iran. China has been affected, in spite of the fact that they have other markets, in spite of the fact that they have other ways, and that Iran doesn't really have a problem with China whatsoever, that there is a strategic alliance of sorts. It is not in any way, shape, or form the same type of ideology that, for example, Iran is fighting with. Iran is fighting with a resistance-minded ideology. They are fighting an existential battle. China is engaging with the United States and the West in a economic war of competition, and we see that reflected in Latin America. We see it reflected in Africa. We see it reflected in how it conducts its business deals in a more win-win style. Wang Yi has said he believes that there could be deals made with the United States as long as the Taiwan issue is respected. And so the thing with that is if the United States can see a win-win, which it cannot, at least not this administration. The United States never operates like this. They operate in the sense of, I'm going to demand this, and if you don't accept it, I'm going to force you to accept it. So even if another administration comes in with a more friendly stance, it's only going to be a temporary type of relationship, a temporary type of giving in. And the way China, and I'll include Russia in this as well, operate is that they conduct their affairs from a diplomatic and a pragmatic, rational attempt. The problem with that is it doesn't work when you have the United States that is not a rational actor here. Okay, they're psychopathic. They want to destroy. They don't want to have any type of agreement where they feel like they are losing an inch. This is why nothing has happened with Iran or Russia, because they feel except Russia has now started to pretty much give in to Trump in many ways. And we can talk about that later. But the reality that I'm seeing here in China that nobody is talking about are the potential outcomes of this could mean future, if not cooperation or understandings or some sort of, I wouldn't say alliance, but I would say some sort of transactions going through. China will give in, the United States will give in, but this isn't a, I would say, a type of interaction where China is just holding all the cards. I think people are underestimating how this has affected China, because all of these people there that went to Beijing have made a ton of money. Yeah, the gas prices are up, but as Donald Trump just said, he doesn't worry or care about the finances of Americans.
Can we just have Jeremy read the attendee list?
Yes.
Okay. Elon Musk, Jensen Huang, I don't know that company. Tim Cook, Apple CEO, Larry Fink, BlackRock, Steven Schwartzman, Kelly Ortberg, Boeing CEO, Brian Silks, Cargill, Jane Frazier, Citigroup CEO, Larry Culp, General Electric, David Solomon, Goldman Sachs, Sanjay Maroda, Micron. I mean, yeah, it clearly, we see who what U.S. foreign policy is all about. I mean, it's obvious to everybody now, but that used to be somewhat controversial. As a historian, there was a backlash when a historian would present narrative of U.S. foreign policy, going back that these corporate elements and business interests drove U.S. foreign policy, and then there was this whole backlash, conservative backlash. But it's so obvious in the Trump era. You don't know the design. I mean, they're making friendly in person, but I mean, really, the U.S. is carrying out a war on China, an economic war, and there had been some good analysis about how the Iran war, the hidden agenda behind the Iran war is to try and cut off oil supplies to China in the Middle East. From the Middle East to weaken its economy, and for the U.S. To make China's neighbors more dependent on U.S. Oil and gas producers, to kind of fortify an anti-China alliance. I mean, it is good that a president is going to China, but I mean it's very superficial. So.
And Vanessa, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I
fun.
mean, I have a few comments, of course, to add to Fee's. I also have a comment. One of my pet hates is the conversion of this aggression, which has been ongoing since 1979 against Iran, into a war against Russia or a war against China, or on the other hand, that Russia and China are winning the war, that Iran is actually dying in sacrificing its youth, its children, its civilians, its citizens to withstand virtually alone. And we'll come back onto this. But I think this concept that the US is kind of taking over the world, the global oil supplies in order to wage this war against China is hugely exaggerated. And I think it overplays the intelligence of Trump's administration and the people that are around him and are advising him. I think there are consequences of this war against Iran that will impact on both China and on Russia. But we also have to understand that Russia is effectively directly benefiting from this war. And if we go back to Russia's abstention, which in my opinion was disgusting if they're considered to be a strategic partner of Iran, yet when Bahrain and 35 other states, including India, Bahrain tabled the resolution to effectively criminalize Iran for defending itself against Israel and the United States, Russia and China abstained. Now, the timing of this is very interesting, right? So at the end of February, just before the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei by Israel and the US, I include both of them, basically the Russian fiscal fund, the sovereign wealth fund, were hemorrhaging funds because of the lack of oil revenue. And Russian economists were basically trying to juggle funds from one to the other to keep each one afloat. Now, when on the 28th, Khamenei was assassinated, shortly after that, and the war started, Putin put in calls to all of the Gulf state leaders, the Gulf state meaning the allies of the US and Israel. He then had a telephone conversation with Trump. Shortly after that, Kirill Dmitriev, his kind of fifth columnist, was dispatched for talks with Witkoff and Kushner. And on the same day that Kirill Dmitriev landed in Washington, the abstention was handed over to Trump at the UN Security Council. And lo and behold, what happened immediately after that? The sanctions were lifted on Russian oil supply, which gives them income of 150 million per day. And they've just been extended to the 16th of May. So they finish in 2 days. And Dmitriev is going to be dispatched again to try and beg Trump to keep this easing of sanctions going, because they're getting $150 million per day. And I looked into it today. It offsets the damage done to Russian oil facilities by Ukrainian strikes in Russia. So this is incredibly important to them. But it means they're entirely dependent upon the Trump administration to keep that sanction easing going, right? That's number one. Number two, if we look at both Russia and China, keep putting forward red lines, like even about this summit in China, in China, they were saying, okay, but we don't want to see any more escalation in Iran. Effectively, they were saying there has to be peace with Iran, no further aggression, and then we'll talk about the summit, right? What happens? Trump escalates, he targets Iranian naval vessels, one, and two, he imposes further sanctions on China, on two, I think, satellite companies that were providing surveillance to Iran through the Beidou system, and also I think one of the, I can never remember its name, but the one that is actually producing the satellite images, which is telling Iran how much damage has actually been done, particularly in the Gulf states, right? And so that red line was crossed, and yet the summit goes ahead. And if we actually look at these technocrats that are now in China, how many of them have connections into Israel? The majority. The huge majority, right? And so this, for me, it's not only about the oligarchs and the technocrats. It's about that connection to Israel and that connection to the outreach agents of Israel, which are the Gulf states. And Russia is the same thing. Russia's priority has been the preservation of its partnership with the Gulf states. Let me give you a fun fact. Which countries are allowed into Russia without a visa? Israel, Bahrain, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. Not Iran.
Wow.
So, you know, I'm just raising, I guess, issues that a lot of people overlook in their eagerness to kind of say, China's winning this war, or Russia's winning this war, or Iran can't win the war without Russia or China. Iran is effectively pretty much fighting this war alone, and that is also by choice. Iran has had a policy of strategic independence for years, partly also because they saw what happened in Syria and the betrayal of Syria, particularly by Russia. So Iran has a policy of strategic independence anyway. But where my objection is to people that are imposing some kind of weird Russian-Chinese victory over the war that Iran is fighting.
And another thing that keeps coming up in our circles are two journalists that I deeply respect, Medhurst and Berelik. And their perspective is more on how the United States is, you know, just whipping everyone's butt with the concentration and control of oil. And you're not seeing that big success, right? Or are you?
Not really. No, not really. I mean, for sure, there are going to be unintended consequences of the disaster of a war against Iran, which I think Trump thought was going to be as easy as taking Maduro out of Venezuela. That gave him the kind of pump up to think that Iran was going to be over and done with. If that were his policy, why was he insistent on the Iran war only taking a few days? You know, because it's a long-term policy. If that, and yes, he is trying, for example, to get control of the Malacca Straits, but he's failing there because Malaysia pulled out of the kind of defense and economic partnership because of tariffs, and Indonesia is pretty shaky on that. Now, Malacca Straits is, 80% of oil supply to China and something like 60% of the LNG, natural gas. So Malacca Straits, to some degree, has a greater impact on China than the Hormuz Straits. And in any case, in the Hormuz Straits, Iran vessels have been getting through to China anyway. So I'm not even sure of how effective the US blockade of a blockade has been in that sense. So I'm not disagreeing that oil is a target. I'm just not agreeing that the US is kind of so in control of the situation that this is going to work in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Did you want to touch, ladies, on some of the other points we discussed, like what is going on in Peru right now? What is going on in Cuba?
Yeah. Yeah, I can touch on that. So, in reference to, what was just said, I think this is related to that. I do think oil is right now what's being looked on, but I think further beyond oil, when we're looking into the age of surveillance, of big tech, of AI, that's we're looking at the resources. We're looking at the lithium, right? We're looking at things that are necessary to make these chips, to continue producing more tech that's related to the digital age. And so I don't think the ultimate goal is even about oil. I think the ultimate goal is about controlling the resources, and for the United States to build a technate of sorts in the Americas as a whole. And this is something that I think has not really been looked on in connection to everything that Vanessa just said, because it's entirely connected. You have the Zionists there, you have the technocrats there. Um, as you all know, right, Palantir is infested into every apparatus in the United States government. We're talking about obviously the Department of Defense, but we're also talking about the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Health. We're talking about pretty much every single facet. And Palantir is Israeli tech. So when you say that it's in there, it's in there. And this was the Trump objective, because he sold everybody, if you guys recall, the idea that, oh, we're going to get rid of the NGOs, we're going to get rid of all of the Soros stuff, and we're not going to deal with that. But what he did was put in Elon Musk and all of Silicon Valley into the government, and now a lot of the things that were part of the government have been privatized. And somebody once said, when you merge the corporate sector with the state, it's fascism. Well, we're in a technocratic fascist track here. That's what is happening in the United States domestically. And that policy mirrors pretty much the foreign policy that we are pursuing in Latin America. We have seen the forced selling of the F-16 fighter jets to Peru. They also got Black Hawks. And one of the things I've been talking about is, why would a country like Peru need this type of military at all? Like they don't really. They have defense, air defenses. They do. They have a lot of focus on that, but they really haven't had to use them recently. And so we have seen an uptick in that. We have seen an uptick in the actual, there have been jets going around. They've been doing simulations. They've been doing testing. And they recently bought the jets for a little over $3 billion, while people are very upset about this, because there's a lot of infrastructure that's needed. There's a lot of things that are really need much more focus than this. And initially it was.
And can you just say who the government is in Peru? Because they've had coups there against, left-wing. Pedro Castillo was ousted. Just to give some more context.
Well, so right now Peru is in an election stage, like election limbo. The president there right now, he is not the legitimate president. He was actually placed there initially because one of the last presidents was ousted, and I forget who the last president was ousted, because this has happened so far.
Well, there was this woman, Lina Boulard, that was quite repressive. I know the CIA was supporting her. They backed a coup against Pedro Castillo, who was more left-leaning.
Yep. Yeah. So we can go back to there. So Dina Boluarte was the vice president of former president Pedro Castillo. And he was ousted under this false, I would call it lawfare, right? Where he was accused of trying to change the Constitution, which he did. He was, but he had tried to go about it in a way that was lawful. And he did this because the Congress in Peru has too much power, right? So he just tried to go about it this way. He fell into a trap, and he was put into jail by Congress, and he's still there today. That's Pedro Castillo. He was the left-leaning president that talked about nationalizing lithium, that, you know, talked about no more poor people in a rich country. That was the party's motto. Peru Libre, that was the party. And then his vice president was one of the people that betrayed him, and that was Dina Boluarte. She was replaced for corruption, and then that person was replaced again for corruption. And then we came into Jose Maria Balcazar, who is the current president. He's not, I would say, super left-leaning, but he is more left-leaning than what's been out there. And he refused the Trump planes. And basically, the Congress went around him and basically forced him to accept that. And then he said something about against Israel and Zionism. And then it was quite actually controversial what he said. He mentioned Hitler, and he mentioned the World War II being pushed in as a war because of Israel, well, he said Jews. And so that he had to apologize for that. It was this whole thing. So that's the current president. There is an election coming between Keiko Fujimori and the left-leaning president, which is Roberto Sanchez, who has just been accused just recently of corruption just after he started leading the polls. I consider a lot of this lawfare. I consider a lot of this to be part of Peru's broken system where Congress has too much power and they don't let presidents rule. 10 presidents in a decade, or 9 presidents in a decade, is insane. But that was just a quick thing. Like the real picture here, what I'm seeing is the what I would call it the Isaac Accords that started in Argentina, right? And Milikowski. And these Isaac Accords are intended to bring Israel into Latin America. Along with the Isaac Accords, there are the America Shields program. The America Shields program is also part of bringing Israel into Latin America, but through the United States, and the United States taking over much of Latin America. And why would this happen? Well, this was all of the objective under Donald Trump, right? He was going to focus on West Asia, and he was going to focus on Latin America. And I could continue, but I just want to give a preface as to what that entails. And that essentially is just basically a building a sort of not just more military structures, but a way to basically confront what's coming, the economic war against China, yes, but essentially bring in this neo-feudal, neo-colonialism that you were mentioning, Gloria.
Wow. Vanessa, having you guys here is just amazing. It's such a privilege for us and for our audience to hear you guys.
Can I just add to that when we're talking about resources, and I've been saying this for a long time, especially when Fia and I are talking, but aside from oil, water is actually a primary resource. And if you actually look, AI needs water, by the way. Look at the reports coming in from the United States right now that these AI tech companies are basically draining entire areas of water through illegal usage. They're actually diverting water into their production facilities, right? But if you look at the land grab, and when I talk about Israel, when I talk about the Zionist movement, what I'm talking about is the model for every single country and population in this world. So if we look at what has been happening in Gaza since before 1948, the first thing that the Zionists were ensuring that the Palestinians didn't have, there are many things, but one of the primary things was water. Hence, you had the poisoning of the Palestinian wells in Gaza. You have all the natural sources of water have basically dammed by Israel. And therefore, all the water that comes into Gaza, most of it is polluted deliberately or contaminated, is actually supplied by Israel. Then if you look at the land grab in Syria, even previously from 1967, the Golan territories supplies 30% of Israel's water use. Now, of course, they're encroaching into southern Syrian territory, where again, you have the main water sources, both for Jordan and for Syria itself. Then if they create the David's Corridor, they potentially get control of at least part of the Euphrates. I believe Turkey will also eventually be in the Zionist US crosshairs because it's too powerful a country to leave in direct competition. If Israel extends to the borders of Turkey, Turkey then becomes a threat. It becomes a neighbor, which is a threat, perhaps not immediately, but in the future, because it has a very strong military supplied, of course, by NATO largely, but it has control of many of the water sources. Turkey itself has been played a very dirty game with water supply, both in Iraq and in Syria. And there are papers describing the fact the 2009 drought in Syria, which was a precursor to the regime change war in 2011, because it basically pushed all the rural communities into the suburbs of the big cities, where, of course, it was very easy to radicalize them, to bring weapons in, to prepare them for the insurgents in 2011. And that was actually manufactured by Turkey, by actually reducing the levels of the Euphrates, by diminishing the supply of water into Syria deliberately. And I think there is a Red Cross investigation into that, of all things.
That's interesting.
And so,
many people tried to claim that climate change caused that, and that was behind this war. And that's interesting what you're saying. Yeah, I haven't heard that before, but sounds right what you're saying.
Well, if you look at how during the war against Syria, Turkey regularly cut off water supply, for example, to 1.2 million in Hasakah in the northeast, the Kurds, literally just cut the supply, so 1.2 million people were left without water. So it's very easy for Turkey to do it. And this building of dams is a huge factor of the Zionist war. What's happening in Ethiopia that's going to affect Egypt, right? It's the building of the dam. Zionist money is going into that. Under the Shah in Iran, Israel was heavily involved in dismantling the old system that Iran had that really worked well, which was a well system deep underground, which would fill with rainwater during the winter, and then they could use it throughout the arid months. Those were all dismantled for some modernized system, which of course now is not working. We also have the situation where the bombing of the cloud seeding operation in the UAE, suddenly Iran has huge amounts of rain. That's another subject that I don't have the expertise in to talk about, but I don't rule it out that there was some weather manipulation in Iran, because I've heard stories like that in Syria during the time I was working there also. And then in Lebanon, what do they want control of since 1948 is the Litani River. And the Litani River is indigenous entirely to Lebanon, right? But there are a number of other very important major water sources that also connect to Syria, like the Assi River, which actually flows uphill into Syria from Lebanon. So the source is in Lebanon. So the control of water, in my humble opinion, is actually almost more important than the control of oil, because we can, to some degree, survive without oil. It's not going to be easy, but there are clean energy alternatives coming in. China, of course, is kind of leading the way in that. And that's another reason that I think China is not going to perhaps be as affected or impacted by a drop in its oil supply or even by the loss of discounted oil from Venezuela and even from Iran, because of course Iran to a degree is now going to profit from the fact that with an oil shortage globally, it can start upping the price to China, who benefited from low prices for a very long time because of the sanction regime against Iran. So I think it's incredibly complex, but I think water is something that people overlook actually in this. And I think it's something that in the future is going to be extremely scarce. And we've seen the privatization of natural mineral water, for example, for years now.
I just want to add real quick in relation to Vanessa's excellent point on water. The Amazon is very much a part of Peru and Brazil, and even Colombia and Venezuela to a degree. You have a lot of influence in the Amazon with that as well. But it's particularly Brazil and Peru. And Peru has the upcoming election between a person that is pro-Palestinian and doesn't want to go towards the United States, and has even mentioned BRICS. And even though I don't really rely on BRICS as anything more than a strategic type of alternative plan right now, based on everything happening with Russia, China, and their heavily aligned to the Gulf, I still think that in a position of where you have a battle going on between the United States and China, there are candidates that are leaning away from the United States that would benefit these countries more in the terms of their sovereignty, right? And so you have a very heavy battle coming in with Peru on that. And then you have Brazil going Lula da Silva again, facing the, I believe one of the top candidates is Bolsonaro's son. We have the left versus right, but more importantly, the Zionists versus anti-Zionists, which has a lot to do with the takeover. And the Amazon has been one of the areas, as Gloria, you know this, where there are attempts to corporatize, to privatize the Amazon River and the water there. And that would be a total devastation for the entire region. They are the lungs of the earth. Everybody knows this. There's so much life there. There's so much importance there. And that is definitely coming into play this year with these two elections and where these countries go. Basically, we're seeing, how Venezuela was captured, how Maduro is in jail, and the people are trying to get him back, and how he was ousted, and the internal struggle that we're seeing in Venezuela right now. And how sad that is, the selling of its assets, the oil control by the United States, all of that. Well, that is definitely the aim for pretty much everybody. And I have to mention this, Honduras Gate. Honduras Gate has been a revelation for a lot of people, but for many of us that knew that who Juan Orlando Hernandez
Can you discuss Honduras Gate for our audience?
Yeah, so Honduras Gate is the revelation done by Canal Red. It's a Spanish channel. They did an investigative report, an excellent report, and they uncovered these audio files, these leaked audio files, where Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras and also a convicted drug trafficker that Trump pardoned in 2024, basically admitted to having an international network of Trump and Israeli allied influence to try to basically destabilize left-leaning progressive governments in Latin America, starting with Honduras itself. They talked about the former president Xiomara Castro and attacking the former president's family, Manuel Zelaya, who was ousted under the Obama administration. And they talked about really getting rid of them, getting rid of the influence. He had this conversation with the current president of Honduras, Furas, and he basically admitted that he got paid $350,000 from Javier Milei, who was also in agreement with them. They formed a media company. There was a fake media company that was directed and coordinated by Washington with help from Washington, with money from Washington. And this was all going to lead to garner support against Xiomara Castro and against Zelaya, but also try to target other presidents. He mentioned Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico, and also, of course, the Colombian president as well. So you have these two people that have constantly been targeted by the Trump administration. He threatened Petro Gustavo, the Colombian president, with invasion. He's threatened Petro Gustavo, accused him of narco trafficking, and we have seen that this narco trafficking argument, an old age argument, as you both should know, you host of the show, has been used throughout destabilizing and regime change in Latin America. But what the Honduras
that was our last week's show.
Yeah. Well,
we're with you.
What this reveals, though, is that it's not just it's not. We know it's not about narco trafficking, but it's also about infiltrating Latin America, not just with U.S. power, but Israeli power. And recently in Peru, we have seen many videos from locals in Cusco, Peru's Andean region, the indigenous land to the indigenous people that still inhabit it, that speak Quechua and Aymara. These are the indigenous languages of Peru. They have been complaining of Israeli presence. We have seen the Chabad Lubavitch establishing presence in Cusco and Pisac, two very cities that still have ancient ruins there that a lot of tourists come and visit. And not just establishing presence, but buying up land. Sources close to me are telling me that there's been a buying up of land, and this is increasing the price of land for other people, locals, to buy, and it's been being bought up by a lot of Zionists, and they're very unhappy about that. And so this isn't just, Argentina that has welcomed Zionists in, but this is also Peru that is facing a lot of immigration, let's call it that, immigration that they are viewing with disdain, because the Andean population in this area is strongly pro-Palestinian, and they have had altercations with Israelis there. So it does feel like this is just, in a way, there is some sort of coordination with the Zionist involvement, and then the U.S., of course, ramping up the military sectors, like we saw with Ecuador most recently as well.
And what is your assessment of the situation in Venezuela with Delcy Rodriguez? Is she, pawning off Venezuela, or is she trying to save her country by giving some small concessions to the United States? How would you assess the situation?
I mean, I don't know if you want to say something, Vanessa, but I'll just quickly say, I think looking at it from a Western lens, and just saying she sold out the country and that this was a betrayal, we really don't know what happened inside. But what we do know are a couple of things: that Nicolas Maduro is the president that people want back, right? So everybody in Venezuela seems to be doing everything they can to get him back. That's number one. Number two, what we're seeing here is Venezuela be held they're held hostage.
It's extorted. It's extortion.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of broken up about this, because what I see happening, I hate, obviously. I hate seeing the United States come in. I hate seeing the way Delcy Rodriguez is welcoming people and being so open and diplomatic in all of this, and saying that she was lamented Donald Trump's assassination attempt. All of these things, yes, they don't make me feel good, and they don't put trust in what is happening. However, I also have to look at it from the lens of they are being extorted. They are under a hostage situation. Venezuela could not have gone on a head-to-head fight with the United States. They didn't have the military capacity to do that. And this is something I've talked about numerous times too, is there's no way that they would have done that. And I think that ideally people will say, yes, well, you can fight to the end and blah, blah, blah. But when you're president, sometimes, or when you're a leader that's responsible for a lot of people, you're going to try to save lives. And I suspect that that's essentially what they're doing, is they're trying to survive, essentially.
So, sometimes the only thing you can do is hold on and wait stuff out. You can't, push back. You just have to hold on and endure. And to me, that's what I believe is going on. I had attended the most recent hearing of President Maduro and the First Lady, and I wrote an article. It's published in Covert Action magazine on this, and yeah, I think that basically there's a gun to Venezuela's head, and if they get out of line, they can murder Nicolas Maduro. We've spoken about I've written pretty extensively about our prison system and how easy it is to eliminate people that you want to eliminate, either directly through a faked suicide or through just negligence. I mean, everyone has some medical problem at some point, and you just don't rush in with appropriate care. So really, the First Lady and the President of Venezuela, their lives are on the line here. And the other thing is, they have papers ready to go to remove, the sitting president, to remove, Delcy. So it's either you comply or we kidnap you, and we kill other people, and it's all you can really do is hold on. So I mean, I have tremendous respect for how they're managing to survive and keep things going for the people of Venezuela under these extraordinary circumstances. And really, what we've got here is a gangster country. We've got a country that holds you up on land and pirates you at sea. This is gangster capitalism right up front, gloves off. It is what it is.
And what is your assessment?
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Vanessa. Go ahead.
No. I mean, Fee knows that I'm in touch with the Venezuela ambassador who formerly was in Syria, but who was very close to President Maduro. He's now basically working out of Beirut, but he's still ambassador for Syria and Lebanon. He just returned from a trip to Venezuela. And pretty much he said the same thing. Delcy is doing her best to actually protect the closest people to Maduro, who are under constant perpetual threat, basically. And that, as you said, includes Delcy. The priority for them is to protect Maduro. According to what he said, they have moved him into better facilities within the prison system as part of the deals that they are now working on. At the same time, which I think is something optimistic for me, Venezuela is still very much supporting Iran. They're still very much supporting the regional resistance here, right? Both in ideology and as far as they can go in policy. Of course, it's very difficult. When you say
here, you're about the Mid East.
West Asia
here
region,
for you is the Mideast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so I think now, as you've both said, it's a question of managing the situation. As Fee said, and actually as the ambassador said, they could have tackled an on-the-ground invasion. That's what they were prepared for. But Russia has never supplied them with the promised air defense. That sounds familiar. See Syria, see Iran. And basically Russia and China kind of ran for the hills, right, symbolically speaking. So they were alone. Cuba, pretty much the same situation. Russia was allowed by the United States to send in one oil tanker, which kept them going for a couple of weeks, but we haven't seen any more.
I think there's been a couple, but they're only 2 weeks quantities.
I would check that, because the second tanker, as far as I know, was turned around. Okay. But check it. I checked it a couple of days ago. But in any case, if you consider the fact that the US was boarding Russian ships and taking prisoner the crew quite happily, right, in what they consider to be US maritime shipping lanes. And then suddenly Russia was able to send a boatload of oil into Cuba. To me, this wasn't Russia breaking the blockade. This was a deal was done between Trump and Putin, perhaps even to kind of repair the very broken image of Russia from the resistance axis perspective, right? Across the board. There is no trust for Russia here in this region, in West Asia. There is no trust for Russia in Iran, and that's a historical contextual issue in Iran, right? And so therefore, I think Venezuela was isolated. And it can't, as Fee said, how can it deal with airstrikes and naval strikes that are going to kill thousands of people? Look at what Israel is doing here in southern Lebanon and the southern suburbs of Beirut, what it did in Gaza, now what it's doing in the West Bank. Venezuela can't withstand that kind of violence, and they're in the US backyard. Iran is kind of on the other side of the world, literally, right? For the US to maneuver to attack Iran is a huge issue, but to attack Venezuela, it's easy.
I just got to say, the U.S. backyard is a moving goalpost.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it used to be Central America, and it used to end at Canada. Now it's, Greenland to South America to, the whole world. I just wanted to throw that in. That backyard is pretty big.
And before we run out of time, Vanessa, can you comment? You're an expert on Syria. Can you comment about the situation now in Syria, and also how crucial that covert regime change was for the war in Iran? A lot of activists, don't understand that. They oppose the war in Iran, but they were cheerleading for regime change in Syria.
Well, also, just to say quickly, we see this as a series of steps that were taken, to control the energy in the region, starting with, Venezuela, Syria, and, keep going. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think if you go back to the clean break doctrine, it was made very clear by the CIA and Israel that they would take down Iraq. Iraq would be, or Baghdad would be, the road to Damascus. And for them, it was incredibly important to break the back of Syria, because Syria was really the main spine of the resistance axis. It was the land bridge from Iran through Iraq into Lebanon and Palestine, but it was also the primary manufacturer of weapons for the Palestinian resistance, but also for the Lebanese resistance, right? And so therefore, Syria was incredibly important for the Zionists to bring down prior to the war against Iran. And if you go back again to Wesley Clark, when he named the 7 countries, and Iran was at the end of that list, because Iran is perhaps the most difficult for them to destroy. I mean, Syria held on for 14 years, actually for 75 years, because the destabilization of Syria has been ongoing since its independence in 1946. But what has actually happened, though, and I think they underestimated this, as always, is that even though they consider that they've destroyed the supply routes from Iran through Iraq, Syria, and into Lebanon, they haven't, because they've imposed an al-Qaeda regime on Syria that is stocked with, what are they? Wahhabi mercenaries from all over the world. Many of them are not Syrian. So they don't care. If a delivery is coming through Syria and someone's going to pay them the money to let it go across the border into Lebanon, they'll let it go. And every now and then, Jolani will make a big hoo-ha about, we stopped a delivery of weapons to Hezbollah. But it's like once every 3 months. But having said that, Syria is being plunged into the familiar kind of debt enslavement. IMF loans, MasterCard and Visa are back there. McDonald's, KFC and Burger King are opening up. The usual suspects like Tom Barrack is coming in and stuffing his pockets full of the billions that the Gulf states are prepared to invest to get a foothold in Syria for the future. But in reality, life for the Syrian people is far worse than it was under President Assad. They have less electricity, and it was pretty bad during the last years of the war against Syria. There's very little employment. Many of them have been laid off because they're not Wahhabi. The Alawites, the Druze are now not allowed to go through the Syrian education system. That's a ruling that has just been put out in the last 2 days. And effectively, he's settling foreign Wahhabi Takfiri elements in all of Syria. So Syria is going to become kind of a hotbed of Takfiri al-Qaeda factions that can then be turned against, for example, potentially Lebanon, but perhaps not in the way that people perceive it. They're also still being aided by Ukraine on the eastern border of Lebanon, but also into Iraq to tackle the Iranian-linked or Iranian-allied resistance factions there, which include the Popular Mobilization Forces and so on. So, but when I see how Hezbollah surged back after the hit of losing Syria, the hit of losing Syed Hassan Nasrallah, their leader, it's extraordinary. And if they can do that, neighboring Israel, literally being bombed 24/7, and they can still fight back, and they're still defeating the Israelis on the ground, horribly for the Israelis. It's extraordinary. Then I have every hope that Syria at some point is going to turn. And I also think Jolani has finished his job for the West. I don't think he's actually going to be around for very much longer. He's not able to stabilize the country. He'll never be able to, because those that are working underneath him or aside him have interests in other areas, and the majority of his military forces are foreign mercenaries.
Well, I think we have to wrap it up. So I'd just like to give you ladies the opportunity to just remind our audiences how they can follow your critical work. I guess starting, Vanessa, why don't you?
For me, the best is probably Vanessa Beeley Substack. I mean, you can follow me on X and YouTube and Telegram, all the same. I only use my name as Fee does.
And Fiorella? You're muted.
Hi. You can follow me at Fiorella Isabel Substack. You can also follow me on Fiorella in Moscow and Telegram, and Fiorella Isabel on X, Fiorella Isabel M on X. But also we have a show called Critical Perspectives on YouTube. You guys should follow that as well.
And Livewire, right?
You mean Spotify?
Truthwire.
Yes, Truthwire with pasta. Yeah, well, you can follow that on YouTube as well.
Okay. Well, that wraps up our show for today. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm Gloria Guillo, joined here by Professor Jayme Kuzmarov. Remember to like and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. And just to mention, the opinions you hear are ours and that of our guests, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. Please find us on Substack, Twitter X, and Podbean. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week. Okay, we are still live, but we're not recording now for the radio.
I've got to run, but can I just ask briefly, Vanessa, before I leave, that who do you think, you said at the end that Jolani may not stay around much longer, or perhaps the U.S. will turn on him? Who do you think would replace him?
I think they'll try and bring in a kind of secular Sunni Muslim, probably one in diaspora in France or in the United States. There is one guy in France, Firas Klaas, who's being, his name is being floated as a potential.
Can you spell that?
FIRASTLAAS.
I think Jeremy's got an article coming.
Yeah, well, I may do an article in the future, so I'm going to use some of it. Thanks, well, I have to run. Thanks, very enlightening as usual.
Yeah, amazing.
So do I, actually. But thank you for having me on.
Thank you
thanks for having us on.
Yeah.
Take care, guys.
Keep up the great work,
Bye.
Bye.
All right, and with that, we'll go ahead and close the show. Thanks to our guests. Thank you, Jayme. Thank you, Gloria. And thank you for watching. This is a presentation of Pasta to Go from our executive producer, Craig Pasta Jardula, also Fee's partner on the Truth Wire. So please catch us over there. You'll see me running those shows as well. Have a good weekend, everybody. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll see you next week.
And a big thanks to Jayme.
No problem.
Thank you, Jayme.
Guys. Bye-bye.
You know the system's